Katie Halper is an American comedian, writer, filmmaker, podcaster, and political commentator. She is the host of her podcast, The Katie Halper Show.
Women were abused, children were mistreated when they entered the homes.
What has your family said about the conditions that your sister is facing?
And co-host of the podcast, Useful Idiots with Aaron Mate. Katie grew up in New York City, Upper West Side, not far from Columbia University. In a Jewish home that can be easily described as a cerebral workshop for a young mind, with her father, a psychiatrist, and mother, an English professor and novelist. Their diverse influences took Katie from teaching history at Dalton College, to working as development director for Community Television Center, to being a stand-up comedian, a documentary and filmmaker and writer, and finally ending up in media with her ferociously liberal opinions. Katie's columns have been published in New York Times, The Nation, The Huffington Post, Open Left, The Raw Story, Jacobin, The Guardian, Salon, and many other left publications. She has featured as a commentator on MSNBC, The Young Turks, Fox News, The Hill Rising, and many other media platforms. In 2022, she was fired from Hills Rising for her segment in which Katie had called Israel an Apartheid Government. Moeed Pirzada, editor, Global Village Space, invited Katie to explain how she got interested in Pakistan and Imran Khan's struggle for democracy, and how Pakistani Americans can become part of the American narrative.
Why do you find Imran Khan a fascinating figure?
Cricket player who turns into this, who becomes prime minister. He strikes me as a populist, somewhat socialist, someone who challenges the elites.
They end up talking of tribulations of Jewish history and the growing schism between political Zionism and liberal Jews. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for an informed view of our complex world.
So how come you got interested in Pakistan?
Honestly, how did I get interested in Pakistan? I just noticed that...
Was I the first person you brought in your show, the Katie Halper show?
Were you? Let me think.
Was there anyone before me from the Pakistani descent?
Pakistani descent, yes. I had the great Assad hater and Shuja hater. And Assad hater, sadly...
Assad hater.
Haider, yeah.
Okay.
He passed away in December, a brilliant political philosopher. He wrote a book called Mistaken Identities, actually about identity politics and the weaponization of identity politics that I highly recommend. His brother Shuja is brilliant. And
yeah. Shuja Nawaz. So you had Shuja Nawaz on the show?
No, Shuja hater.
Shuja hater.
Yeah,
okay.
He's at The Nation.
The
Nation. He's an editor at The Nation, but he's a journalist who writes a lot about music.
Culture. And he's Pakistani origin?
Yes, but they don't talk. They weren't. That wasn't their focus. Their focus wasn't Pakistan. But I will say that a lot of Shuja's family really appreciated the interviews that I did with you. Wait, and other people in Pakistan. Did I have on Alima Khan before you or after you?
Yes. You had Alima Khan more than once. You had Alima Khan.
Yeah, but I think she was the first. But I wanted to have you on. I don't remember something.
So then you had Mariam, who's the sister of Bushra. Then you had Barrister Shahzada.
Right, and then I also had Hassan Ali, who had a very spirited debate with Mariam.
So my question: how this interest grew? I mean, because all your life being, a filmmaker, a journalist, a writer, you were not talking about.
I guess I was drawn to the story of what happened to Imran Khan, and I thought it was. I liked Junaid Ahmad's writing about it. I liked Ryan Grimm's writing about it. I found him to be a fascinating figure, Imran Khan, and so I wanted to know more about it. And it was also so notably absent.
Why do you find Imran Khan a fascinating figure?
I mean, just the very nature. I mean, this is not to reduce him to this, but it's a really cool story that you have this cricket player who turns into this, who becomes prime minister, and he's very. I mean, you and I have slightly different politics, so it's interesting because I think you and I probably describe him somewhat differently, because we probably like different things about him. But he strikes me as a populist, somewhat socialist, definitely, someone who challenges the elites. And I was stunned by how little coverage he got. And of course, to be honest, the real thing that got me interested in him, besides he was very charismatic. I like that he's a charismatic populist on the side of good as opposed to a populist on the side of bad. Is that, and another, actually, it's interesting because there's another thing that I find very dangerous is and again, I'm going to cite and give major props to Thomas Frank. He wrote a great book called The People Know, and that's about populism. And there's a dangerous false equivalency where people kind of say you can be a populist on the right or a populist on the left. And his thesis, and I share this, although it's almost a winning battle rhetorically, but that it's not like you can be a populist on the left or the right. Populists are on the left, and then there are people on the right who co-opt populism. But he was a populist who was not on the right, who didn't co-opt populism for the right. He was on the left. So I found him to be an important figure. And then, of course, when I learned that the national security state of the United States didn't like him, that's kind of an immediate bonus for me. That's a sign that you're doing something.
But you might have seen that how his opponents were able to describe him as an Islamist, as a Taliban Khan.
Who was able to call him that?
I mean, his critics and his opponents.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but I didn't buy it.
Then you look at the Epstein emails,
Right, exactly. But yeah, even better. I mean, that's a great endorsement, being insulted by Epstein. Like, what's a better, in fact, his family should put that on a website for him. They should point that out, yeah.
So tell me one thing. I mean, as a journalist, I mean, you are in this business of narrative shaping for the past so many years. How would you understand and tell us that Pakistan, which is the fifth largest nation state in the world and a second largest Muslim country with a huge diaspora and a U.S. ally from 1950s, finds no space and no interest in the U.S. media?
I don't know. I mean, you would know better than I why that is. I guess it's not convenient. I don't think it fits that neatly into any political narrative. Perhaps that's why. I think there's also people just don't know a lot about it. Our media doesn't know a lot about it. For Western media, it's like you either have to fall on one side of there's like the axis of evil, and there's the war on terror, and then there's like the shared values of Israel. And I think outside of these dichotomies, like people like Jake Tapper has no idea what he's talking about, and people in the media don't understand things.
Are you then saying that Pakistan has to be one of the two extremes? Either it has to be the evil, like Iran, the excess of evil, or it has to be...
I'm not saying it has to be. I'm saying maybe that explains why it doesn't get more media attention, because it's not easy to fit it into the kind of stupid, reductive framing that the media so enjoys. You can see this so much the way that they report on Israel. It's all like, Hamas, Palestinians are terrorists, and Israel, they are defending themselves. I mean, all the way that the Hasbara, the Israeli propaganda, has been so successful in penetrating Western media kind of tells you everything you need to know in terms of how critical Western media is. They just regurgitate narratives more than anything else. And I guess there aren't that many, there isn't like an APAC for Pakistan.
But I think, so there are two different streams. One is the Pakistani American community that wants Pakistan to be more visible on the media. The other side is the Pakistani military that is trying to hobnob with the Israelis. So right. I think they're also trying to become part of the narrative in a positive way.
Right.
I don't know which side. I don't know which side will win in the end.
Yeah, and then of course, adding more confusion to it, then you have, India loves bragging about its relationship with
Israel.
With Israel, yeah.
Have you been to India?
I have. I've been to. In fact, I was there when Benazir Bhutto was killed.
2007.
Yeah, that's when I was
December
there.
2007.
Yeah, exactly.
But you've never been to Pakistan?
No, I'd like to go, but I haven't been. We have good friends in Pune.
Pune is India.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm explaining why I went to. That's how I got to. Well, my dad is in love with India. He's always loved India, or I don't know if always, since college he loved it, and he went there after college. But then we wanted to go to India and also visit our friends in Pune. So we have a friend who He's my age. He's a couple years older than me, but good family friends. Their son went to India to study. He's an ethnomusicologist, and he met his now wife at sitar classes.
And
And then,
Satar classes.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
So, but your Katie Halper show doesn't focus on issues in India.
We have sometimes, like when there was there was some repression, an attack on journalists, we'll focus on it then. Yeah, we don't pay that much attention to, I mean, basically, if there's an interesting story, I will just look into it and bring on a guest to talk about it. So,
And that's a
and I've
crucial
had,
thing.
and I've had on VJ Prashad a bunch, and he talks about India.
This is the crucial to understand. What interests the US media? I mean, India is so big, but India is not figuring in your show. What interests the media? What triggers the media's interest?
Oh, you're asking me? I thought you were
I'm
telling me.
asking you. I mean, you choose your topic.
I mean, but there's a difference between my show, my media, and establishment legacy media, right? Because like what interests me is, for instance, I used to focus a lot on Russia and Ukraine because I felt like there was a lot of warmongering from our media. I thought that there was a lot of oversimplification. I mean, I don't like Putin, but the idea that he's a Hitler is so ahistorical, and it's also dangerous because it makes it hard. It makes diplomacy toxic because the big takeaway of the Holocaust is you can't negotiate with a Hitler. And yeah, Hitler was not someone you could negotiate with, but Putin, guess what, is not Hitler. And I think that that's an example of such irresponsible framing. So I think maybe one of the things that like provokes my interest is when I notice that the media is reporting on something in a problematic way and in a way that is like basically pro-war. So that is often, but again, then I also just become interested because I heard a lot of, I was really interested in what Junaid Ahmad had to say. I found his analysis really interesting.
What you found interesting about him?
Oh, just the way he kind of tied what was happening to Khan to the larger context. He's so outspoken on Israel-Palestine, so I knew my views kind of aligned with his. And so he had a lot of credibility for me. And so then when I read what he was talking about, I read his work on Pakistan, I became interested in that. But it is true. Like, I mean, I'm not to say, I'm not trying to make myself super special, but like, what motivates me again is not what's going to motivate. I mean, I'm lucky because I'm independent, so I don't have to worry about like corporate media pressure or towing a line.
If I were an Israeli TV host, my first question to you would be, how can a Jew be against Israel?
So a couple things. One is I just have to clarify, modify, I guess. I would say I'm more leftist than liberal, which is maybe not that important a distinction for some people. But actually, I find myself critiquing liberalism more and more. But that's kind of a different conversation.
But that's interesting to me as well. I'll come to it as well. What's the difference between liberalism and being left?
You wanted me to answer that now, or
just go on? I mean, just
okay.
Remember this thing. If you can go on. If I have to ask my questions. Many of my people get actually very upset. They said, "Why do you interfere with some train of thought?"
I understand. Yeah,
but if you are not finished, just say, "Let me complete that thought." So just go ahead.
Great. Okay. So I would say that how can I be a Jew who's critical of Israel? I mean, to me,
to the extent that you're being fired from the Hill TV. I mean,
right.
For making
so
comments.
Yeah. So I got fired. Okay, there are a couple things. I'll back up before getting into the specifics of the Hill. But just in terms of more philosophically, that question, I mean, being a Jew is not the same thing as being a Zionist. And one of the ironic things is that as much as Israel likes to claim that that's true, that's actually, it can be argued that in itself is a kind of anti-Semitic stereotype, because the argument is that all Jews are a monolith and we're actually loyal to Israel. Now, that is known as the dual loyalty trope, which used to be a big thing. It still is a thing in some ways. And in fact, the very people like the ADL or AIPAC or the Israeli government and all of its defenders, the very people who claim that someone like Ilhan Omar is guilty of perpetuating the anti-Semitic dual loyalty trope, they themselves are perpetuating it every time that they claim that being Jewish is the same thing as being pro-Israel. So that's ironic. But
so what's the difference? What's the flaw in the logic?
I mean, to me, it's like saying, well, if you're Muslim, why aren't you pro-ISIS? To me, it's like almost as similar as those two things. Now, it's that parallel doesn't totally work, because I would say that the Jewish support of Israel is much bigger than the Muslim support of ISIS, because Israel is a government, ISIS isn't a government. But I'm just using it as an example of things that aren't connected. And in fact, I would say it's actually less connected, because at least you could argue that ISIS is a total perversion of Islam. To me, there's nothing actually that Jewish about Zionism. I mean, Zionism started out, political Zionism was Christian at first. You know, the people who wanted...
That's very interesting. Political Zionism was Christian to begin with.
Yeah, it started as Christian. And it was a lot of people they had religious, Christian religious support for Jews going back, because that would be, I guess, trigger the rapture. But then you also just had, basically anti-Semites who were Zionists, who wanted to get rid of Jews, and the way to do that is you send them to another country.
I mean, you're making me very confused. Anti-Zionists were pro-Israel?
You mean Zionists? Wait, anti-Zionists were pro... Hold on. Anti-Zionists were... No. Pro is... Okay. I would say that there's a big overlap, ironically, between Zionism and anti-Semitism, even though Jews
Zionism
like me...
and anti-Semitism.
Yeah. So, because think about it.
But anti-Semitism means being anti-Jew.
Yes. So I know it sounds crazy, but and there's a fabulous rabbi who you should have on your show. His name is Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, and he wrote a book called The Empty Wagon: Zionism's Journey from Identity Crisis to Identity Theft.
You're showing me his book.
Yeah, and it's all about that. Yeah, that's
Introduce me to him. I will love to talk to him.
I definitely will. Yeah. So there's a lot to talk about here. So one, again, is that you had a lot of people who wanted to get rid of Jews, and so sending them to Israel or another country was a good way to do that.
How interesting.
Then you have, and this is also crazy, you have a lot of early Zionists, of the Jewish Zionists, a lot of them were what I would call self-loathing. And that's funny, because Jews like me get called self-loathing, because, again, the premise, which is false, is that to be Jewish means you support Israel. And if you read the words of people like Ben Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, if you read the words of people like Herzl, Jabotinsky, they wrote things that were very anti-Semitic. They talk about the Jew this, the Jew that. They're disgusting. They're the ashes of history. They talk about the diaspora Jew. And that's their term for basically Jews who were living in exile, which was most Jews, because, Jews have been living in exile.
So what kind of dichotomy was this? If Ben Gurion and the others were anti-Jew or anti-Semite, I mean, why were they founding a state for Jews?
Well, because they wanted to create a new Jew. That's a great question, actually.
Oh.
A new Jew. And the new Jew was going to be everything that the old Jew wasn't. So the new Jew was going to be armed, militaristic, work the land, all the things that Jews in exile couldn't do and didn't do. And they had a real kind of, then later on, after the Holocaust, the image of the Jew as going to their slaughter like sheep, like lambs, that was the stereotype about what happened to Jews during the Holocaust. So Israel was going to be everything that Jew wasn't. It wasn't going to be the praying Jewish rabbi in the corner cowering as the Cossacks came through and raped his mother, sister, wife, whatever. It wasn't going to be the
Cossacks.
Jewish,
you are referring to the Polish.
Yeah, I'm talking about, this is like pre-Holocaust. I'm just talking about all the kind of tropes and the histories.
But that's also part of the history. The Cossacks attacking the Jews are part of the history.
Yes, right.
Interesting.
It wasn't going to be
Ashkenazi. You're an Ashkenazi Jew.
Yeah.
Right? Were Ben Gurion and the others also Ashkenazi?
Yes. Yeah. Ben Gurion wasn't his real name. I forget what his real name was. Netanyahu's real name is like Milakowski or something. They made up these fake Israeli names, Hebrew names that weren't real. And again, that's another thing, is that they had a lot of self-loathing for the Ashkenazi culture, but they were Ashkenazi. And they also, this is really crazy, they were also racist against the Mizrahi Jews. Mizrahi Jews are the Jews who were in the Middle East.
It came from North Africa and Middle East.
And North Africa and the Middle East, yeah. So they were mistreated. That's a whole other story. After the Holocaust, they needed to bring in more Jews to Israel. So they brought in a bunch of Mizrahi Jews. They actually, and this is, if you don't know the history, I'm very aware that I will sound like a conspiracy theorist to you, but it's all documented. But Zionists.
I'm trying to understand, if you actually study another culture, it's not always that easy to grip it in the first.
No, I understand. Yeah. Well, okay, let's back up a little bit. So you probably know a lot of leftist Jews, right? There's that whole history of leftist Jews.
Everyone I know is very liberal.
Yeah, right. So there's that history, and part of that comes from the fact that there was such a big diaspora community. There are a lot of theories about this. And I also want to be clear, like Norman Finkelstein talks about this a lot. It's not that most Jews are this way, I would say. It's that they are overrepresented in these groups. So I would say, like, in the civil rights movement, for instance, a lot of the white supporters of civil rights were Jews. A lot of the American communists were Jews. And that's a charged term. A lot of people are anti-communist, but whatever. Especially pre-Stalin, being an anti-communist meant basically fighting for economic and racial justice, I would say.
How are the Ashkenazis different from Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews?
Well, culturally, they're very different culturally. Like, that's the other thing, is that lots of, when I say something so Jewish, and I say that kind of affectionately, like Larry David is so Jewish, he's actually very Ashkenazi, right? He is very different from Yemeni Jews or Iraqi Jews. And the thing I was going to say before was that, and there's a great historian, Avi Shlaim, who wrote a book called Three Worlds. And he's a Jewish Iraqi who was born in Baghdad, then moved to Israel, and now lives in England. And he actually did a study, he did research on this. Everyone knows that there were bombings in Iraq of Jewish places, and that led to a lot of Iraqi Jews going to Israel. But there were a lot of rumors that Zionists were involved in that. And then he documented that at least there were 5 of those, and I don't remember if he found 3 of them or 2 of them were definitely done by Zionists. Not all of them necessarily, but they were done by Zionists because, and this is a great example, is Zionism values a national political project over the lives of Jews. Now, I want to be clear.
But Bernie Sanders is also Jew, I believe, right?
Of course, yeah. He is yes, he's very Jewish, and
Professor Jeffrey Sachs in Columbia University is also Jew.
Yeah. But Bernie Sanders
what is this schism? I mean, let my viewers understand who are mostly of the Indian and Pakistani origin.
Yeah.
What is this schism? Some of the most highly educated American Jews are against Israel, or have been in the past 3 years.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Well, because there are a couple things. One is that I'm a Jew who actually doesn't believe that Israel should exist as a Jewish state. There's that. Now, Bernie Sanders and Jeff Sachs, I don't think believe that. I do. But I don't even know if Norman Finkelstein believes that. But what any Jew, even if you're a Zionist, and that's such a loaded term, I'm anti-Zionist, but any Jew who's Zionist, I would say, and a lot of people with my politics kind of cancel people if they're Zionists, even if they're liberal Zionists. I don't really think liberal Zionism can exist, but let's just pause that. If you identify as a Zionist, there's still no way that you can be a remotely moral person if you don't oppose the genocide. So there are different levels. Like, again, I'm anti-Zionist, but I have friends who are liberal Zionists who believe in some like abstract way that there should be a Jewish home. But to me, the most urgent question right now, and people will disagree with me because I have friends who think, no, anti-Zionism is the most important thing to be working on now. For me, I'm more of a, I guess, pragmatist, and I think that you should bring people in wherever they're at, and that you can probably actually show them why Zionism is dangerous. But the most pressing thing, in my opinion, is to stop the genocide. I also believe that occupation needs to be ended.
When you say that Israel should not be a state for the Jews, that means you're basically saying that you're rejecting the two-state solution, and you're basically saying there should be one state for all, but the Jews,
with equal rights,
Muslims, the Christians,
yeah,
for everyone.
Exactly, equal rights. Yeah, it shouldn't be a theocracy.
But Israel is not a theocracy.
Well, okay, it's a if you don't want to call it a theocracy, and you could argue it's a theocracy because, I mean, this is not that extreme version of it, but you can't get married by even a Reform rabbi. You have to get married by a conservative rabbi.
Really?
Things are closed on Fridays, so there's not a total separation of synagogue and state, if you will. But
But maybe this was not always the case.
I would say it's an apartheid system. We don't have to call it a theocracy. It's an apartheid system.
And this is the word that actually lost you your program at the Hill.
Yeah, right. So when I argued
what were you saying? What were you saying there?
I was basically just arguing that there are two systems, two sets of justice. There are two legal, like, there is not separate but equal in Israel. And now, so Palestinians live, you have Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, and then they're called like 48ers. Those are Palestinian citizens of Israel. And so there are different rules for them. And there are rules about like not being able to live certain places. I mean, what's scary is that Netanyahu actually made it worse. Usually, like, as time goes on, governments try to be at least nominally more liberal and tolerant, but he didn't even do that. They did the nation state law, which made it more of an apartheid state. So I guess I just want to say that, you know, my Jewish culture and heritage, the one I come from, is one that really values equality, social justice. There's even a concept that comes from Judaism. It's not in the Torah, but it's in some commentary on the Torah, tikkun olam, which is to repair the world. Now it's getting even more complicated. I'm not really religious, but I do think that there is a prophetic tradition. There's a social justice tradition in all religions, I would say, whether it's Islam, Christianity, or Judaism. But for me, my Jewish background, again, I come from a secular family. I went to a left-wing summer camp where we had to share our care packages. I'm trying to think of the kind of the signifiers that are less New York centric. Even being from the Upper West Side. I
come to the Upper West Side, but tell me, were you shocked when the Hill Television fired you from the Rising program?
I was shocked because I had said things like that. I had been very critical as a guest on the Hill, but this was different because I was guest hosting. So I was a weekly guest. I would go.
You were hosting Rashida Tlaib.
No, okay. What happened was, no, we didn't. I've had her on my shows before, but that wasn't this.
You're saying that as a host, they were less tolerant. I mean, if you had said things as a commentator.
I think maybe there are a couple theories, but I made this video. I wrote it, and I said that because Rashida Tlaib had been attacked for saying that Israel was an apartheid state, and she was attacked for saying that you couldn't be progressive without being progressive on Palestine, because there's even a term, it's called progressive except on Palestine. So she was saying that's not a possibility. I defended her because she was attacked by Jake Tapper, who loves attacking her. She was attacked by Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She was, of course, attacked by ADL's Jonathan Greenblatt. And when I argued, I kind of made a very good, airtight case about it being an apartheid state. And the way I argued it was very hard for Israel defenders to push back on, because I quoted international law, I quoted the UN, I quoted, probably most damningly for these people, I quoted actual Israeli politicians, like former prime ministers, ministers of various sorts, saying that either Israel was an apartheid state or was heading towards an apartheid state. And then I cited South African leaders. So I cited, obviously, Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, and Naledi Pandor, who is who was a South African minister, who actually was instrumental in bringing the genocide case against Israel. So
you made your case. I
made my case, and it wasn't just like my feelings or I have a feeling. I laid it out, and so then they wouldn't air it, and I pushed back. I wasn't even that aggressive about it. I was just like, I think you should air this. Can you air it and then air an opposing monologue? Why don't you do that, or have on a guest that pushes back? And then they had me speak to this high up at the Hill. And he was like, well, we always have the right to pass on a piece, which is not what happens. Ryan Grimm himself said, because he said, like, during his tenure there, he had probably submitted 100.
Ryan Grimm had also been at Hill.
Yes, yeah. So he had submitted, he followed Crystal and, not right away, I don't think, but he eventually followed Crystal and Sagar. So he was like, no, I submitted like hundreds of radars, and they literally, the editorial process, because basically this guy Bob Cusack was trying to pretend that they had an editorial process, and of course that sounds reasonable. Every outlet can pass on a piece, but when you are a host there and you're writing a monologue, there's no editorial process. Literally all they do is they upload it as he said, they upload it into the teleprompter, like errors and all, typos and all, and you just read it. So obviously this was something different. And then they said to me, they said, what was it? That they were, that I was no longer needed even as a guest. So they were turning away my like free labor.
Okay, let me come to New York. What was the experience of growing in one of the most wealthiest and the most elitist part of United States and the world? Upper West Side in Manhattan. Growing up in a home with the father as a psychiatrist and mother as an English professor and novelist. What was that kind of experience?
Well, it's very much, there's this movie called Annie Hall, but that's by Woody Allen. And there is a whole, I am a stereotype of this. He even says to Carol Kane's character, he's like, oh, Upper West Side. He says Central Park West. I grew up on Riverside Drive. Upper West Side, Central Park West, very strike-oriented family, socialist summer camp. And that is my family. But it's not quite as elite. I'm not denying that I grew up with a lot of privilege, but my parents got that apartment before that neighborhood was super fancy. It was really nice, but my mom has this really good eye. She grew up very working class, and she was kind of like the caretaker for her mom. Her mom was she was charming, but basically became a speed addict. And so my mom did a lot of the parenting. You can read, my mom has a great fictionalized memoir. So it's basically like
novels as well.
Yeah. Novels and fictionalized memoirs. And so the memoirs is called, do I have any of them behind me? No, I have to get some.
You have only 3 books, 4.
No, yeah, I have some more under. I used to have them, but Nora Eisenberg is her name, Eisenberg. So she wrote something called The War at Home, which is about her upbringing. But so yeah, I definitely grew up with privilege, but a lot of my haters call me like a trust fund socialist, which I'm not. But even if I were, that's great. Being a class trader is admirable. If you support policies that you don't benefit from directly, that's even more admirable. Like was Roosevelt bad because he came from a patrician background, which I don't come from? But this whole idea, they call me, I did go to a private school called Dalton, so they call me a Dalton socialist. But again, it's interesting because Neera Tanden, this Democrat, neoliberal, I would say, she loves to talk about how, she was at the Center for American Progress. She was a big Clinton fan. She was a big part of the online bullying army. Really,
is this the background that makes you liberal or left? Your background.
Yeah. Well, I was just one thing, because I think it speaks to the values that I have from my parents, which is that she would call me a Dalton socialist. And she always talked about how she lived in Section 8 housing and was on welfare. And that's great, except like I didn't live in Section 8 housing and I wasn't on welfare, but I support things that are better for those people. She was on those things, and she's a sellout who turns around and is a Democrat, but a Democrat who's all about slashing the welfare state. So to me, I'm just bringing that up as a kind of like value system. So yeah, my parents are, and my dad as a psychiatrist, a lot of people have this image that he was like of psychiatrists being very fancy and Freudian and sitting with people, analyzing their dreams. He started out as an internist, and then he switched to psychiatry, and he's very into he's a great therapist, but his focus is really on the biochemical. He was going to do.
He's more on the biochemical side of the psychiatry.
Yes. So
not on the side of the analysis.
Yeah, he's very into psychopharmacology.
Who had more influence in shaping your ideas? Your father, the psychiatrist, or mother, the novelist?
Probably my uncle, who's my mom's brother. Both sides of my family were quite left, and my dad's uncle, it was his father's sister's husband. He was blacklisted during the McCarthy era. He was the head archivist at the UN's archives in Geneva, and he was fired because he was a member of the John Reed Society, which is this communist organization at Harvard when he was an undergrad. So he was fired like summarily, and this guy who had was a Harvard undergrad, then did his master's at I think Chapel Hill, and then was an archivist. He then spent the rest of his life selling medical equipment because there was a guy we call a fellow traveler, with the same politics, and he employed a lot of people. He had like a stethoscope business, so a lot of these communists who had been blacklisted wound up working for him. So both sides were leftists. My dad's uncle died in the Spanish Civil War. That's also a big, part of that trend of leftist, secular leftist Jewish New Yorkers. Although he was actually from LA, but that's neither here nor there. The leftist secular Jewish tradition from which I come the Spanish Civil War was a very important moment historically, because the Spanish Civil War was actually considered the dress rehearsal for World War II. So the people who fought in the Spanish Civil War they were called premature anti-fascists. And this is interesting. There were it was something called the International Brigades. Those were the brigades that fought to defend Spain from Franco. And they all had different names, and the name for the American one was the Abraham Lincoln Brigades, and that's because that was back when the communists were trying to be like very patriotic and kind of reclaim American patriotism and the ideals of Lincoln and Jefferson. So I bring this up because my dad's uncle, who died in Spain, was killed by fascists. He was part of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. But guess what? Among all of the international brigades, guess what the most common language was? Guess what it was? Among all from all over the world. Guess what it was?
Spanish or English or Yiddish?
Yiddish, exactly. Yeah, Yiddish. Because so many Jews saw this as this is why there is this leftist Jewish tradition, because they were kind of aware, because of Hitler's anti-Semitism, they were aware of it, but they also were they were a large part of the anti-fascist movement. So there was, of course, some self-interest in it, but it wasn't just that, because Jews had been very active.
I'm learning new things. I never realized that the Jewish element was so strong in terms of the struggle in Spain. Well, one of your films, I think one of your films which you directed, perhaps the first, La Memoria e Vega, right?
Yes,
it's actually all about the Spanish struggle.
So I made that it was an oral history project and then documentary, which I turned into a documentary. I did that when I started it when I was an undergraduate. I went abroad to Spain, and I visited this really it's a monstrosity, monument that is like built out of the bowels of a mountain, and on top of it is a crucifix. It's like 500 foot tall mountain. Then there's a big cross on top of it, and it was basically the fascist Francisco Franco had it built ostensibly at first it was to be the burial place of the founder of the Spanish fascist party, the Falange, and that's Jose Antonio Primo de Rivera. It was to house his grave, but it was really done for Franco to have a place to be buried. And it was, at first, it was very clear in the language. It was very overtly partisan and a vindictive monument, where it was to honor those who fell for God in Spain. Now, in the Spanish Civil War, that was very apparent. That language was the side of Franco. They fought for God in war, and the other ones were fighting for like the Antichrist. That's basically how they described it. So it was very one-sided. And then over time, because of the Cold War and Spain kind of ingratiating itself into the West, they pretended over time that it was actually a monument built for everyone, for both sides of the war. But what was very sick about it is that they had the losers of the Spanish Civil War. They used prison labor. So the losers of the Spanish Civil War built this disgusting monument that was paying homage to the people who defeated them. So anyway, I made a documentary about that. And what was fascinating is I didn't even know, but coincidentally, there was this huge explosion in historical memory when I was working on this, and there were a lot of people literally unearthing graves, like mass burials, because Franco and his forces would just kill people and throw them into pits. And so there's a real revival of historical memory, and people are doing DNA tests and finding their relatives. And there was also the transition in Spain from dictatorship to democracy was considered very modeled by a lot of people, kind of a teachable moment, but it was also very problematic. I mean, it was smooth, but they didn't have the Truth and Reconciliation committees that they had in South Africa, for instance. There was not any of that. So
do you sometimes fear that in United States we are at the verge of a civil war?
I mean, I go back and forth on that question. I do think that Trump is, and sometimes my fellow leftists, I think they're two kind of tendencies, and neither one is the right one. There is a tendency to kind of downplay how unique Trump is, and then there's a tendency to exaggerate how unique he is. The truth is, like, he is he's in some ways definitely an aberration, but then in other ways he's more of a continuation than I think people like to admit. Like a lot of the immigration policies, I just had on a lawyer to talk about this on my show the other day, really did start under Bill Clinton. And Trump and his sadism could not happen without the kind of enabling of the Democratic Party. So, but that's not what you asked me. You asked me about a civil war. Oh, so I bring that up. The truth is, I don't know. I could see it going either way, but I think the big problem is that there's no class consciousness in the
Since you said
Democratic
Trump
Party.
is unique, do you think everything is being created by the Trump, or Trump is a symptom? Trump is a
Oh
creation.
no, Trump is definitely a symptom and a creation, and didn't come out of a vacuum. And again, he does a lot of the things that he does were kind of trailblazed in some ways by the Democrats. And a lot of the cruelty that we see in Trump's immigration policy is actually the cruelty of of Bill Clinton. What the difference is, there is the discourse, and I'm not downplaying the significance of discourse, but there definitely is, there's the spectacle. So sadism is on display with Trump in a way that it wasn't under Democrats, where they kind of downplayed it. But
if Trump is a symptom of the circumstances, something that was growing, then what was that thing that was growing? I don't know if you have read the book by Ezra Klein, Why We Are Polarized, by the New York Times.
I haven't read it. No.
Yeah, but he explains. Ezra explains that all this has been growing for the past 30, 40 years. And how do you see this polarization?
Well, I don't know what he attributes it to, but for me, in my opinion, a really good book is by Thomas Frank. It's called Listen Liberal. And it's about whatever happened to the party of the people. And his focus is kind of how the Democrats' failure to take on the wealthy is what enabled the Republicans, and why people are voting against their best interest, self-interest, because he wrote a book called What's the Matter with Kansas? And that was all about looked at why poor people voted Republican. Like, why would they vote against their own self-interest? And that did really well. And it was he was on MSNBC all the time. And then he wrote a book called Listen Liberal, Whatever Happened to the Party of the People. And that looked at why poor people didn't vote for Democrats, and that indicted the Democrats. And so guess what? He obviously didn't get invited onto MSNBC. But I think it is the retreat from class-based politics, and instead of doing organizing around class, there's been kind of a micro-targeting approach by the Democrats, because I think the Democrats, and to me this all goes back to, you can see all of these trends in the 2016 and 2020 race, where you had Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. And Bernie Sanders would talk about class and greed and the banks and the billionaires. And what did Hillary Clinton do? What did she say in response to that? She gave this speech, which crystallized it perfectly, where she goes, "Is breaking up the banks going to get rid of the of racism and sexism? No." And that was such a dishonest thing to say, because in the first place, first of all, Bernie Sanders never said breaking up the banks would get rid of racism and sexism. So it was a straw man argument. But the other thing is that breaking up the banks would have had a big effect on racism, because it was such a racialized, like the housing crisis was so incredibly racialized. But for me, that represents, like, the Democrats chose to go with the Hillary side, the Hillary camp, instead of the Bernie Sanders camp. And a lot of people would smear Bernie Sanders as even like daring to speak to Trump voters. And that's what you need. You want people to compete with the bad guy. You want someone who lands with the bad guy, lands with supporters of the bad guy, and to peel them away from that person. And it was so stunning to me that people would criticize Bernie Sanders for being someone who Trump voters would be drawn to. Like, how else are you supposed to win elections? Anyway, that's a whole other discussion.
Do you think we're going to grow out of this polarization after Trump, or this is going to continue?
No, I don't. It's not like, I think a lot of people are mistaken, and they think once we get rid of Trump, all will be well. And now Trump is a disgusting figure and a divisive figure and a polarizing, and he runs off of, he's kind of openly sadistic. But again, these things don't come out of a vacuum. And if the Democrats want to actually, and this is another thing that Thomas Frank talks about. Like, I grew up kind of, I would say now, naively thinking that the Democrats were just cowards and kind of inept, and they just couldn't get their stuff together. And then when I read the Thomas Frank book, it's like, no, they actually agree with the Republicans on a lot of things. Yeah, on social issues, not so much. But you can't really separate social issues from from economic issues, right? Which is why, again, going back to that, breaking up the banks and sexism thing, Bernie Sanders was for minimum wage, raising the minimum wage. That was part of his platform. Hillary Clinton wasn't. Now, Hillary Clinton, and this is how I think I became a popular kind of voice in the podcast scene, because I was a feminist and a woman and a leftist, and I was very insistent that the feminist candidate in the race was Bernie Sanders, not Hillary Clinton.
How interesting.
Bernie Sanders supported raising the minimum wage. Hillary opposed it. Now, who are the majority of minimum wage earners are women of color. So that's just an example of how you can't separate those things out. And that's why it was so disgusting when Hillary made that speech about, breaking up the banks and sexism. Again, the implication being that Bernie was this out of touch, sexist, racist white guy who didn't care about women or people of color, when obviously all of his policies actually benefited both of those groups, and they're not.
I still find a comedian, at one point you were a stand-up comedian,
Yeah.
so were you used to mimic people's voices?
A little bit. I do always impersonate Bernie's. I can't help it. He sounds like my family, my mom's side of the family. Yeah.
So moving forward, do you think Trump would actually take Greenland?
Oh, I don't know. Honestly. I have no idea what he'll do. I mean, but that's part of his shtick, right? It's a Yiddish word. Part of his shtick is to be, what's his name? Pete Hegseth called it like strategic unpredictability. He's erratic. He is. And I think he tends to listen to the last person in his ear. He's not an ideologue. He's an opportunist, which means that sometimes he'll be better and sometimes he'll be worse than Democrats on certain things. But the things that he's doing to undocumented people it's very hard to watch and not be very upset by it. And I think also, like, people use the word fascist a lot the first time, and I don't think it was correct. I think it is correct this time. There's a big difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2.
Oh, really? So last set of questions. In the last 2 or 3 years, the US social media, people like yourself and the others, have taken a very strong position on Israel. I don't think this ever happened before. What do you think? What triggers it? Just Gaza or something else? There's something happening.
Oh, Gaza is huge. There's a couple things. One is the Gaza they're literally live streaming their crimes. In a way, I don't want to say lucky, but Israel being as enabled and coddled, and their sense of impunity is actually very useful in showing the evils of Israel, I would say, because they're literally live streaming it. Like, they're live streaming what they're doing. You have these soldiers, they think it's funny, and then every now and then Israel has to kind of be like, guys, stop live streaming this. It's really embarrassing, and this is not a good PR move. But I think that the people are sick of America. There are a couple things. For me, my interest is, this is a sick regime. It's not even, as Norman Finkelstein says, it's not just a state project, it's a national project. And that's something we can talk about another time. Unfortunately, it's not just like, Netanyahu. It really has buy-in from most of Israeli society. So you have that for someone like me. Then, as someone who's a Jew, I'm very sickened by people trying to hide behind Jews, like by Israel hiding behind Jews or weaponizing Jewish identity or fooling Jews into thinking that we live in a safer world when you have Israel live streaming a genocide and saying it's in the name of Jews. Again, I care about this because I care about Palestinians and human rights, but how does any Jew think it's good for Jewish safety for Israel to be doing this? Even self-interest alone should make you realize that this isn't going to be good for the Jews. Live streaming a genocide, they do terrible things to kids, and then they're saying that this is what Jews want. It's even if you don't care about Palestinians, which I do, but even if you don't, how do you not think that this is going to backfire on Jews? That to me is incredible. But then you have people on the right who really fell for Donald Trump's America First agenda. And this is obviously not America First. And I think that also, though, you have people, there's a real generational gap because you have people who are kind of brainwashed by Zionism. And then you have younger people who have access to alternative media or social media, and what they're seeing is just so undermines the claim that Israel cares about democracy and cares about civilians. They use surgical precision, while Hamas, they try to kill as many people as possible. All these things, you just literally have to open your eyes. And if you're not incredibly brainwashed, then it becomes clear. I mean, there's no way, unless you're brainwashed, that you can look at what's happening and see it with any kind of ambiguity. It's fairly black and white. I'm not saying like.
So let me throw a
history is,
complex
but-
question. Let me finish with a complex question. In this fluctuating, shifting, changing American media landscape, the Pakistani community is not very large, but it's reasonably affluent community. It's not as large as the Indian or the Chinese community, but there are physicians, there are IT people, there are engineers, the businessmen and entrepreneurs. What can they do to become part of the American narrative?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, on the
Let's
media.
see.
Yeah.
I mean, they can go into media.
Hmm.
They can. That's a good question. I'm not sure.
It's a complex question.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Let's see. I don't know. I mean, it's also, I think there's probably like an opening now for people to see, especially if you position, because Khan is very anti, he's very good on Palestine, right? So I think maybe there's an opening for people who care about this issue. And if they don't know anything about Khan, and then they find out there's a guy who's very like vocally supportive of Palestinians and critical of Israel, that's a way to get that particular story in there. Also, another way, given this what's happening now with Israel and Palestine, is of course if you attach the how dangerous Modi is, someone like Modi is, and you show how he's so chummy with Netanyahu. That's another way, right? To kind of to show the relevance of that like geographical area.
It's an interesting comment. You think Modi is very dangerous? Why?
Isn't he? I mean, he's not very democratic. He's fairly anti-Muslim. He loves Netanyahu. I don't know if he's dangerous to like on the scale that Netanyahu is. No, he's not dangerous on that scale. But he's a fairly bad. I mean, I think he does a lot of damage within India.
It's an interesting comment, and many Indians are not going to like it because he's very, very popular there as well.
Yeah, but a lot of bad people can be popular too. That's the scary thing we have to figure out, and then you have to figure out why they're popular, and then you have to figure out how you can compete with them. But a lot of people compare him to Trump, right? Like he's scapegoats people, right? That he scapegoats the Muslim community a lot, fearmongers, is somewhat, populist in a not very egalitarian way.
Katie,
but again, for better or for worse, I'm just being strategic here. Like people know that he's an ally of Netanyahu. So if that's a way that you can kind of get this issue into it. And then just one other thing I want to mention that I'm working on, if that's okay. And we have to do another episode where I break down more of the history of, because anti-Zionism used to be a popular strain for Jews. And Jews didn't want Zionism because most Jews were anti-Zionist because they wanted to live where they were at. They were assimilated, and they didn't want the world to look at them as like loyal to another government. And that's why it's so ironic that Israel is doing this. And you can see with the Hannibal Directive that Israel is fine with sacrificing Jews. Like this is not about Jewish safety. If this had been about Jewish safety, they would have negotiated with Hamas and they would have gotten prisoners, hostages traded and released. They wouldn't have bombed areas where they knew the hostages were being held. And you have hostages saying that they were more afraid of Israeli bombs than they were of their Hamas captors. And one thing I'm doing actually now to kind of push back on this narrative that what Israel is doing is good for the Jews, and that Israel is about Jewish safety, is I'm making a documentary about Holocaust survivors who are protesting the genocide in Gaza. And they're basically saying, like, not in our name, never again is now, don't use what happened to us, what we survived, to justify doing something similar to another group of people.
So, Katie, thank you for now, but we will continue to be in touch. And I think we can actually have a dedicated discussion on the issue of the Jewishness and Israel, why all Jews. I think that's a huge subject, and we should talk about it.
Yeah, and you should definitely, I'll introduce you to Yaakov Shapiro, because he's like, you'll be blown away.
I would love to talk to him.
Yeah.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.